The final GOP presidential debate of 2015 was held this week with two clear rivalries on display. Jeb Bush and Donald Trump spent a good deal of the time attacking one another, as did Senators Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz. Dave, this is one of a long line of debates, and obviously the nominee doesn't come out of one debate in the middle of December. But from what we learned from this, what did you think?
Well, I think we see it was a very helpful debate, I think, for educating the American people about the choices they're going to be making. And it got into, and Hugh Hewitt and the rest of the moderators, I think they were the best so far of all the debates about asking serious questions that brought out serious differences, including a pretty thoughtful debate on both sides about whether we want regime change to get rid of Assad in Syria or not. There's a pretty big difference between the parties in the sense that, well, not only on the Republicans want to get their candidates out and shown to the public, whereas the Democratic National Committee is doing everything it can to make sure people don't watch. As a Bernie Sanders aide said, you know, why are we having this on Saturday night? You know, was Christmas Eve taken? You know, the DNC is in the tank for Hillary and is doing everything it can to minimize any awareness of the potential alternatives that Democratic voters have to her. And it's a difference between a party that's confident in its ideas and wants to share them versus one that is not. I think the most important single thing that came out of this among a leading candidate is Donald Trump doesn't know what the nuclear triad is. You know, you don't have to know what the nuclear triad is unless you're going to have your finger on the button. And to be so incredibly clueless to not know that is another example of his extreme irresponsibility. But the voters are going to have the choice. President Obama hasn't bombed ISIS's oil fields and oil production facilities because he's worried about the environmental damage that it would cause. If you think the greatest threat to this country is climate change, there's one party for you. And if you think a much more serious threat that ought to be dealt with is ISIS and the Iranian nuclear bomb, there's another party for you.
Eric, like I said before, we were not going to decide the nominee from a December debate, but this is the last debate until January, so there's going to be some momentum out of here. Your brief take of what you saw at the debate?
Oh, several takes, but let me try to go fast. One is there's much to be fearful of, going back to our last round in this country. There's much to be taken seriously. The Obama foreign policy, you can't even find many Democrats these days to defend it or find it terribly resolute or terribly coherent. Yet the fact that you had all 9, not even to mention the undercard before the main debate, candidates beating up on it, just the totality of it made for a sort of a fearful evening where, you know, everyone, I think, turned on the TV and immediately went and locked all the doors in the house. What I found interesting is that there was a diversity of opinion, a substantial diversity of opinion on that stage. Unlike the Democratic Party, where you find very little diversity of opinion these days, there is a range of opinion on various serious issues within the Republican Party. Whether that will serve them well, ultimately come next November or not, remains to be seen. There's other kinds of diversity in the Republican Party that you don't see on the Democratic stage. 2 of the foremost candidates now are of Cuban-American heritage. Ben Carson had his moment. He seems to be receding, but African-American male, you have Carly Fiorina. So it's interesting that the party that is not usually associated with diversity is the more diverse party in terms of the presidential field these days, both in terms of the composition of the candidates and ideological diversity of opinion. I think the debate, we have all these candidates. I think we're now 13 candidates or something like that, 14 because somebody didn't even qualify, didn't even have enough polling to make the undercard. And yet you keep thinking it's a big field, and it's really not that big a field. If this field is narrowing and narrowing very quickly, you know, Trump is certainly a part of it, the conversation, Cruz and Rubio. Bush had his best debate by far, but probably too little, too late. I think he is just pulling his hair out. He desperately wants that one-on-one showdown with Donald Trump, but every time, no matter the best lines he used, all seem to rebound to his disadvantage. We will see soon enough when voters start showing up in early February, but I think this is going to be a long process, and pretty quickly we'll have 3 or 4 tickets. There'll be the Trump ticket, there'll be the evangelical ticket, there'll be the more moderate mainstream ticket, there might be one more ticket, and then we'll see a long drawn-out process between 3 or 4 candidates.
Ben, we've seen a real horse race effect with the GOP primary. Has that been helpful overall, do you think, in their prospect of getting their nominee to the general election finish line?
No, I don't think so. You know, and I have to confess, I prepared for this debate by popping a bunch of popcorn and getting a cup of coffee because I knew it was going to be entertaining, and I wasn't disappointed. In terms of what we learned from this debate, there are a couple things that occur to me. I saw one reporter describe the Republican GOP process as they were describing the electorate as anxiety-riddled voters looking for the fiercest possible nominee. If that's true, people were more anxiety-riddled after watching that debate than they were prior to watching the debate. I did think that the most interesting conversation was about the Assad regime and how you deal with Middle East factions, whether you support dictators and despots because you don't like the rebels, or whether you support the rebels to overthrow them. And in that regard, someone who I don't think got a lot of credit for the depth and the substance of his experience was John Kasich, who I thought had some pretty interesting points given his perspective. And so, but he's sort of the moderate voice that I think is an outlier and may not well survive the process. And although everybody criticized President Obama, nobody talked about the fact he got bin Laden. He's gotten some other key figures involved in this terrorist undertaking. So it's not like he hasn't been doing anything, but it just shows the broad range of disagreement and the broad, possible options that are out there. And in terms of whether you have to understand the nuclear triad or not, I don't know if it matters. So long as you're a tough guy, it's all good.
Apparently so. It does come down to toughness. Patty, your reactions to what you saw at the debate?
Well, first of all, David's a tough guy. We all know that. But I have to disagree with him on a couple points. One, it's not like debates in the past have been all that popular to watch. So you could put on the Democrats right before How the Grinch Stole Christmas, Sunday night, prime viewing time, and people would not be watching the way they're watching the Republicans. And there is only one reason people are watching the Republicans the way they are. It's Trump, who is a TV personality. That's why people are interested. That's why we have this huge range of people watching. So I don't think if you could put the DNC on at any time and people would not care that much. I also have to say, I don't think the Republican Party is all that confident in their position right now if they are having secret breakfasts to decide what to do if they need to broker a convention. That does not sound like a party that is necessarily going to get behind the candidate.
Between broker conventions, possible third-party bids, and everything else, it does seem at least in flux.